My sister's going to introduce everyone, and we're going to sit back and enjoy just as much as usual. Shortly, I'm going to turn over the panel to Dr. Halima Taha. But before I do, I want to let you know who she is, just a little bit about her. She's one of the leading voices in collecting art by Black people. And it's wonderful to have her in the house. She's a curator. She's an advisor on the arts. She's recognized nationally and internationally. And she will remind everyone, buy what you love. I just read an article in Bloomberg.com that says that Wall Street, it was in the April 18th, Bloomberg.com, that Wall Street is buying up so much artwork by Black artists that all the prices are escalating. A week and a half ago, master artist Charles White, who is deceased, artwork of his was sold, one piece, for $509,000. One piece. The point I'm making is, those of you who collect more. We want to define our art by people of color. We don't want anyone else to define it for us. You have an excellent opportunity to hear the voices of the artists being led by Dr. Halima Taha. Sit back, enjoy, and when the panel is over, you'll still have time to view, to purchase, to sip, and learn more. Thank you.
Good evening. It's always a pleasure to see so many new and familiar faces together. How's that? Okay. I'm going to say good evening again because I am happy to see all of you here. I'm always pleased to see new and familiar faces together in pursuit of increasing our knowledge about ourselves and the society in which we live in through art. Often when we think about collecting art, we think that it has to be a full-time affair, and that you have to have an inordinate amount of money, or that you have to be an expert. And that's not completely true. There's a series of reasons why many of you are here. Some of you enjoy collecting because of the people that you meet and the stories that you learn about in terms of the artists. Some of you are putting together collections to enhance your living and working environments. Some of you are collecting because the process of doing research about a particular artist that you fall in love with and studying their whole history and who their contemporaries are, that process is like art, is like making a painting. And other people have such an extraordinary passion that it's almost like an addiction. They can't help acquiring what is historical materialism, stories, memories, work that represents the consciousness of the time in which the artists live and work. When you think about ancient civilizations like the Mayans and the Aztecs and Pharaonic Egypt, you realize that the only thing that's left to tell anyone about who they were, what their hopes, their dreams, and aspirations were, is the art and technology that they've left behind. And these artists on this panel represent the contemporary artists whose work reflects the time in which they are living and that they are working. I'm hoping that this evening you'll have an opportunity to learn a little bit more about these artists, their process, and also address some of the issues that have become forefront in the art world among artists and collectors at large. I also want to just take this opportunity to thank both Sharon and Karen Mackey for inviting me to participate in their commitment to nurturing the development of informed collectors, and to also nurture the development of African American visual culture. I'd like to take this chance to introduce and tell you a little bit about each of the panelists. To my right is Asud Funkap. His formal training as an artist began in the late 1970s at the Soho Art Center and later the Art Institute of Houston, where he studied visual communications and graphic design. And he continues to develop as an artist at the Art Students League, where he also teaches. And his work is included in many institutional and private collections. He sees himself, and he has said, as a composer of sorts, bringing together different mediums, tools, and emotions to create harmony and bring life to many paintings. With a bicultural upbringing, his Chinese father and Haitian mother has added to his sense of wonder of the world, and he feels honored and blessed to witness the positive effects that creativity plays in the lives of everyone willing to explore art. To my left is Charlie Plummer. He has been quoted as saying, "Art should change the temperature of the room." I agree. He was born in Alabama and raised in Milwaukee and studied art and design at the American Academy of Art and School of the Art Institute in Chicago. And he's currently a professor at Spelman College and has distinguished himself in many corporate museum as well as private collections. And has commissioned work for the 1996 Olympics and the Atlanta Convention and Visitors Bureau, as well as Fisk University's 150th year anniversary. Also, he collaborated on a project with the Green Bay Packers at the Lambeau Stadium, and he has also illustrated 2 children's books. There's A Dragon in My Closet and Mama Africa. Also to my left is Ruth Miller, and she is a fiber artist who studied at Cooper Union and decided that her passion for Africa, textiles, and style could be better expressed in fiber as a means of embracing the complex layers of traditional African thought visually. And she has said that it is fun to see the pieces taking shape in my hands, like the pleasurable anticipatory tension one feels when assembling a puzzle. The stitches, soft but not smooth, provide texture by casting shadows and reflecting light. To my right is Zenobia Bailey, and she's a multimedia fine and fiber artist, designer, supernaturalist, cultural activist, and she is best known for her eclectic crochet, African-inspired hats, and large-scale crochet pieces and mandalas. Zenobia studied ethnomusicology at the University of Washington, and her interests in craftsmanship and craftswomanship and fabric took full bloom, and she continued her studies later at Pratt, and she continues to soar as well within the medium. And to my extreme left, and your right, is Terry Lynn and Jerry Lynn. They were born on the same day, and they have been complementing and collaborating in their creative lives as artists, and both studied at the University of Memphis and have been featured in national media campaigns and art fairs and publications. And one of the things is that they paint on the same canvas simultaneously, and they have for years, but they've also begun to paint individually. Currently, against the backdrop of a post-Barack Obama presidency, political and personal identity, social justice issues addressing Islamophobia, gender, transgender, women's rights, have become a major part of the social and artistic discourses. And intellectual property in the area of cut and paste has also become one of the most talked about issues pertaining to the rights of artists. And so I wanted us to talk about intellectual property and politics and art, but I also hope that you will ask questions after the panel's asked a few questions, and they will answer various questions from the panel. But there are many layers to the process of making art, the visual statements artists are making, their rights as cultural producers, as well as being, once the work is sold, it is now an asset and commodity. All of these variables are important to them as well as to you as collectors. So I think what I'd like to do is just clarify what intellectual property is. And legally, intellectual property is a property right that can be protected under federal and state laws, and that includes copyrightable works, ideas, discoveries, and inventions. So there's 4 types of tangible property: copyright, patents, trademarks, and trade secrets. As it pertains to artists, we're going to address copyright briefly, because sometimes collectors feel that once they have acquired a work by an artist that they love, they feel that they have the right to reproduce it, even if it's for a few friends. Or, gee, let's do a fundraiser for my alma mater and put this painting on a t-shirt or a cup or a poster. This has happened. Oh, you know about people who've done this? You do not have the right to do that. The copyrights belong to the artist, and once you acquire a piece of work, you are a steward of the work, and it's good to share it by lending it to museums and having it reproduced in catalogs and publications if that's applicable. But if you want to have some sort of commercial enterprise with the image, you must contact the artist directly or contact their art dealer or representative to get permission and make other arrangements for compensation for the artist. I have a few questions that I want to ask the artist with regard to this, and one of them is, how does an artist maintain the integrity of their own work and not cross the line in intellectual property of things that influence them and their work?
Who wants to take that? Okay, I'll start. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. I think that there's nothing original under the sun, but your interpretation of it is what makes it different, and you have to consciously, change it. I don't think. I mean, I've been influenced by probably a dozen different artists and how they've approached something, and so I've tried to pick up on the technique, pick up on the concept, tell a story, but also make it my own. And I think that becomes very important. Even when it comes to photography, I can pull images from several different places and then try to find a way to compose it and colorize it or something to make it uniquely mine. So it's always been something, because I also come from a commercial background. There's always something I'm always conscious of. As an artist, I would never want to produce something knowing that there's a possibility of even getting sued for it. But I think that I try as much as possible to be original in everything that I do. But I have to consciously figure out how to own it and how to make it my own.
Anyone on this side of the table?
Well, I think that's the purpose of art, is to continue the continuum of artists before you, but you are supposed to add that new evolution to a piece. So the artist that inspired me the most in my life was my mother, and I got full rights to anything she did. So, but then too, I didn't like to copy her, because I did want to put my signature on it. But I think that I would encourage artists to pick up from my work and add to it, and for the work to evolve, because that's what evolution is about, but not to look at, you don't want a duplicate, but the evolution of the work.
Well, like Charlie just mentioned, everything is being created way before even the creation of this beautiful planet. But I feel compelled to bring about changes, constantly. And if I sometimes, reflect some ideas or some tendency, and I don't think I'm trying to reflect something that's been there or has been because I've done research starting from Greek history, the Mayan history, Aztec, the Chinese, and it's all integrated into my art. But what I'm trying to do is to combine everything, since everything is already universal, because being universal is being human. And that's what I've been trying to do, is to represent my true self through representing the whole universe in every culture.
Well, that's an interesting question. Can you hear me? Okay. That's no. It's on. Okay. Oh, all right. Sorry. I'm very greedy about images. I have 2 Pinterest pages, and I collect images constantly. But I find that while each one influences me, somehow in the process of that influence, I get distracted because the images come from wherever they come from, through the soul, and they interact with what I've seen before. So I've been lucky that nothing is too close to whatever that I've seen. So it's I think about the other end of it, being copied. The piece I have here, I saw, my brother told me, oh, I saw that on the subway. And indeed, I found it on the subway. An artist had come to a studio visit, seen the piece, and added a small version with just a little twist to his piece. And it kind of hurts, but it's also to be expected. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is. He didn't embroider it, of course. So that pretty much my medium guards against that as far as exact copies. It's difficult. But it's something to consider for the collector as well as the artist.
When it comes to my work, as an artist, I think I challenge myself all the time to, I use reference images and photos on the internet, pictures all the time. But as an artist, it's just something in me that keeps me from duplicating that image or that artwork that I might see. It's just, I guess I'm just blessed with the innate passion and desire to want to show and project my innermost passion and heart, and I try to put that out there in the world. So as long as I'm coming from that standpoint, I have no fear in terms of if I'm copying or if this is looking too close to something else, because I'm always digging deep inside to bring out, I try to. So hopefully what's in my heart is original. And I try to get close as I can to the essence of me, what God has blessed me with. So that's the place I'm coming from, and I just try to stay as close to that as possible. As far as our collaborative work with me and my brother, that's very interesting also, because since we work together sometimes on the paintings, we kind of bounce things back and forth, so that keeps us from kind of duplicating, because if he's doing something over here, I'm doing something, and we merge those things together, of course you got a whole another original piece in itself. So you're talking from two interpretations. So it's pretty easy to create art, and it's fun. I was talking to Charlie early. I mean, as an artist, we get to do what we love to do. And there's not too many jobs and professions that can say that, you know, and I just try to stay close to that thought and that love, and hopefully what comes out is original.
Did you want to answer?
I think everyone's kind of answered it, you know, in their own way, but yeah, it's really nothing new under the sun, but artists have been appropriating art for a long time, you know, from Warhol to even Picasso. Artists have always stole ideas, stole imagery, and recreated those images or rearranged them to create something new. But it can be a challenge, and the idea of somebody, you know, it's really nothing new underneath the sun. But yeah.
I know that several of you do have illustrating training and backgrounds, and you know, Norman Rockwell was known for taking photographs and looking at magazines and then cutting up pieces to create original compositions. So he might have liked a counter in a restaurant and from a picture, and then he would take a clock from something else, and so I think that it's important to keep in mind when you're looking at artists' work as the audience, is that artists, you know, you know, we all know that the brain has two sides, and there's a right and left side, and in education they call it cerebral hemispherical symmetry in terms of the left and right brain function, and artists use the divergent thought process, and creative people use a divergent thought process, where they're looking at the endless possibilities of the medium or the idea, right, at the color or the texture. And in other creative fields, that divergent thought process is looking at many different approaches to the solution. And a convergent thought process is much more linear. A is to B is to C is to D. And that also comes to play in some aspects of the creative process and in other professions. So I think that the idea of interdisciplinary saturation by being saturated by the environment and what you listen to in terms of music or what you're reading or the images that you see and information that you're reading and not reading about that you're aware of. All of this stuff is a psychological, makes a psychological imprint, and it's somehow subliminally absorbed by artists, and then they're going through their own process, and it ultimately will make the piece as unique as their fingerprint, so to speak. And also, your collections are as unique as your individual fingerprints, because they represent what you like, how you feel about a work, what it provokes and inspires. And you know, many of you have friends who say, "Oh, I don't like that." And I'm like, "It's okay, I like it." You know? And that's all right. And you know, I just wanted to point out that is part of the process too, in terms of borrowing. I'd like to ask the panelists, how does identity shape your art making and your politics?
Can I start? I would like to turn that question on its head and talk about how art shapes my identity.
Okay. How does art shape your identity?
My reason for becoming an artist, in quotes, I was always doing art from childhood, as I'm sure everyone here has. But at a certain point, I decided that I was not equal to the task of being a professional artist. And then somewhat later, a few years later, I decided that art would be the perfect vehicle for transforming myself so that I was equal to the process. There are a lot of things, aside from the creation of the work itself, I felt personally I didn't have the courage. It requires courage for a solitary type of person to come and sit in front of an audience. But it requires courage to show your deepest thoughts for strangers as well as friends to see. So those types of changes, I thought the process of creating art would evoke in me. And I consciously set out to do that.
My identity, okay, I'm an African American woman, and I was born in Seattle, Washington. I take my identity from those places, and then I lived in Harlem, I lived in Brooklyn. I take my identity from those places, and those places affect my work. And the people that I interact with, I purposely was in an artist community because I needed to be in a community of African American artists that their minds were greater than the universe. It was just freer and just open, boundless. So, and there was always this exchange. So there isn't a steadfast identity really, and as an artist, and I feel that I can pick from everything that I am exposed to create the greatest that I can for the masses. So the identity isn't it's free, it's very open, but I don't know if I'm answering that question because it's I don't have a steadfast identity. When I look at myself in a photograph, I can identify myself, but then like in my inside, I feel like I'm constantly evolving as far as ideas, and I feel that's necessary as far as the species is concerned, that we evolve. But identity is kind of hard. I don't know if I answered that question.
It's a tough question.
Yeah.
It's a tough question. See, as I look forward to evolve, spiritually, and I find myself kind of being, kind of imprisoned myself, becoming an artist, and I'm forced to express myself and explain myself and try to grow. At the same time, being exposed throughout the years with so many people, so many collectors, and you feel like you need to be more responsible because they need answers. And what kind of answers they're looking for, and you don't know because you cannot read, their mind, what they're looking for through your creations, through your creativity. And you keep reinventing yourself, almost, after, almost every day. Wake up in the morning and trying to create a piece, and you're asking yourself, okay, what I'm gonna do next, what I want to say, what I want to express, and things are changing around us, as we all know. We going through some major changes right now. There was a shift of paradigm. And if we all notice, if we want to notice, things are changing. Our thoughts, our actions, things we do, things we say is going to multiply tenfold because the universe is going 50,000 miles an hour right now as we speak. So as an artist, what I've noticed, I've been around the Paul Goodnight, Charlie Palmer, Bibbs, and Williams Oliver, you know, and so many great artists. And I've learned from them. I've learned from them being humble. And because I keep asking questions, hey, how you doing? How are you evolving? And I find out that they are asking me the same question. How are you doing? What are you doing now? So we are seekers by nature. We are always seeking the truth. So how can we answer that question? It's very difficult.
I'll get to why I asked this hard question.
James Baldwin said to be a Negro in America is to always live in a certain stage of rage. I think the beauty in being an artist is having an outlet for that rage. Not to say that if I wasn't an artist, I would go out there and hurt somebody, but I would say that I need an outlet for what I see, especially with social media and everything, where you're seeing a black man or woman being shot on a weekly basis or a daily basis. What do you do to channel that kind of energy? And so to be an African American is to acknowledge that and recognize that and find some form of expression. And I think I've never made a conscious decision to tell that narrative. It's been more about the desire to express certain things that are going on and not channel that energy in a negative sort of way. Now, just like with the election, I made a conscious decision once the election was over and 45 got into office that I would never paint him, but I would address what I feel about him in indirect ways, and sometimes direct ways. And so there's actually a couple of pieces in the show here. It's my silent series, and the silent series addresses the idea that what they call fake news, or what he uses the term often is fake news. He shifted a narrative when Colin Kaepernick took a knee. It wasn't anti-American. It wasn't anti-soldiers. He was trying to use that platform to recognize something that's been going on for a long time in this country. And so I knew with the silent series, I was going to address the idea that when has it become un-American to speak out and challenge a system that's part of being an American, but it becomes un-American when black people do it. And so I want to kind of address issues like that in almost an abstract way. And so if you go back to the two pieces you'll see in the area where my works are at, and I'm using the colors of the American flag, I'm using the stars and stripes, but notice that the stripes and the stars are across the mouth. And it's saying, no, okay, you will be persecuted. If you look at the history, it's happened over and over again with African Americans that have spoken out. But that's kind of my expression. I can't avoid expressing my images or the works that I do and my experience, and it will typically be black. But with that being said, I shifted my consciousness creatively, and I decided I want to go deeper, because I don't want everything to be black, blackity, blackity, black. I want to kind of go deeper and say, who is Charlie outside or inside of being black? And so now I'm exploring what it is to navigate in a world of spirituality and love and family, and what does that look like? So that's a new journey for me, but I assure you there'll still be blackness in it, because that's who I am.
My identity is all throughout the work. Lately, lately I haven't become a father, but I am a father. Like I said, I'm a black man. I have a family, a wife, a beautiful wife, beautiful children. And I am also a school teacher, elementary school teacher, art teacher, which is sometimes is a challenge in itself. But through it all, my work has started to shift and change and go into different directions based on all of those factors that I just named. I've started a series dealing with my daughter, who it's basically about beauty, but it's also talking about things that's happening now in social media with the how women are portrayed, how not only women, I got a son, how our black men are portrayed in the media. It just seems like you get a lot of negative images and perceptions about our people, especially young people at that. So the work that I've been doing lately is basically in contrast to that. I want to show the beauty, the power that we all have inside, and I want to show my children. So it's kind of a personal, I'm being a little selfish at the same time, because I want to show them that there's more to us, and what you see on TV is not always the reality. So I want to show a sense of positivity, beauty, grace for my daughter. I want to show being a leader for my son. I want to show that the world is yours if you just believe, and like I said, never take what you see for the truth, and live your own truth. And I know I've been talking a lot, but it's another series I started with, you've probably seen The Drum Majors, which was inspired by Dr. Martin Luther King, where he did the Drum Major Instinct speech, where he talked about being a servant, and how we as human beings, everybody wants to be the drum major, want to be out front, want to shine, want to show the fancy cars and the nice homes. I mean, that's all fine, but at the same time, there's nothing wrong with being a drum major or being out front, but do it in serving people, in serving, stand out like Colin is doing, be that type of drum major. And that's basically what that work is about. And so going back to identity, yes, my identity is in my work.
Yes, I mean, it's pretty deep. There's a lot, a lot of, when you're talking about identity and being a black artist, and kind of like what my brother is saying, this whole idea of being a black male, you can't help not to address the issues of blackness. That's just part of, that is, who we are as artists, and as, and that comes through the work. But to make any, I say specific or definite paintings about those things, I guess, I'm doing it in a way through choices of color. I think about kind of what Charlie was saying about the process. The studio process in itself can almost be an act of rebellion, or an act of working things out, in your mind and your soul, and kind of getting these thoughts and feelings on canvas or creating. So, but yeah, I mean, it's I can go on and on about this idea of what it means to be a black artist. What does it mean to be a black artist? In a larger context, a white art world, you're dealing with that as well. So these are thoughts that are constantly going through our heads, and as artists, we're constantly navigating ways of dealing with the work, but at the same time, understanding that you have to maintain a sense of identity, and always constantly, and a lot of times the work, makes that identity for me, and I think about my great-grandmother, who was a quilt maker, granddad, who was, a brick mason. So, I think about those who came before me as well. So it's a deep, thing, think about identity in the context of the larger art world, as well as just being an African American or black artist. So it's deep.
I really didn't mean to make you guys upset about this question, but there was a reason why I asked. I wanted to, point out that, because one reviewer said that black art is art made by black artists. And people of African descent are not a monolithic group of people. So the process of making art, the imagery that they choose, the mediums that they choose, is not going to be cookie cutter. And given the nature of how the art world functions at large, how the collective activity of the art world functions, the series of relationships between the artists and the dealers and the auction houses and the critics and the curators and collectors and academia and appraisers, and how they come together to propel an artist into the marketplace, also has shaped the way that art produced by American artists of African descent have in the past been described, the way that the criticism, the way the work was critiqued, coming out of a long history in which the idea of anyone of African descent making fine art was completely ridiculous. And because art is fundamentally about ideas. So how could people who are subhuman, and that's why they're enslaved, have ideas? Unless they're making craft, some sort of functional type of craft, like furniture, something like that, something functional, architecture, all of which is important. But that was just the way it has for years been placed. And I asked the question to also show that all of you have very different views and it was all valid. And that historically, that distinction and the different personal feeling or spiritual, intellectual approach to the art making is going to be different. And there isn't one answer that's correct. But I think that what has happened is that when in 1998, when Collecting African American Artworks on Canvas was released, at that time, it was the first book that was validating work produced by American artists of African descent as a viable asset and commodity in the marketplace. It wasn't just to collect to decorate, but this was an asset and commodity that had value, that would appreciate, and that was also a very important form of historical materialism. And it brought great pleasure. And since then, and I'd say in the first 10 years after its release, there was a lot of movement going on that was developing over a period of time, specifically because more people were learning about how to collect and protect their collections, but also many of the art professionals that had marginalized work by American artists of African descent, and not saying, okay, you're American artists, but no, these are black artists. And segregating the way art was being written. I mean, I remember when I was in college, I had to write about 2 artists of interest based on Art News and Art in America art exhibition reviews. So I picked Martin Currier and Howard E. Hindell. There were only 4 articles, and it spanned years between the articles. So it really showed me how, the perception of value, despite the historic or linear pedigree of an artist, was not there. Well, I'm happy to say that, after the release of the publication and in conjunction with the National Black Fine Art Show, which I'm sure many of you remember, which created an incredible marketplace, where dealers from all over the country were. We created a foundation for Swan Auction to exist and develop the first African American auction category. And this will lead to my next question, but in the last auction, they earned $4.3 million, which is more than the entire auction house ever earned in a sale in any of their categories in the history of that auction house. So, to my artist, Why is black art important?
Why is it going?
Important. To you, to collectors, to society, to the art canon, why is it important as a part of cultural
You
production?
mean African American art or black art in general?
You can answer it any way you want. I mean, if you can answer it specific, to it being American artists of African descent, we have contemporary African artists. I mean, the late 80s was the first time Africans in droves immigrated to the United States, like any other country of immigrants. Prior to that, everyone was descendants of an enslaved African. So there's a whole thing with what everybody's calling each other, but bottom line is the African diaspora. So you can answer it in any way, based on why is the work, the cultural production of American artists of African descent important to you?
Well, I feel, African American art is important because being from African descent and really severed from our culture and raised in North American industrialized culture, we really had to make up our culture and really didn't get into creating ourselves as African Americans. We kind of assimilated. So there's a freedom that we have in that. I don't think we've really taken advantage of it that much. But as artists, I think, to me, I don't even think an artist should be free from the academy. If you're a true artist, you should be making your own rules and making your own tools. So like there's a freedom there. And I think as African people raised in North America, I think we have this genius that's been really underdeveloped and appreciated, and we really haven't really, even we do have a history of African American fine art. That's nothing really to what we really, the dynamics of us as our creativity is concerned. And well, I think it's it's the alpha and the omega to me.
Well, I'm sorry. I mentioned something, the last time regarding a famous artist, African American artist. That's Jean-Michel Basquiat. And if we don't know this, in 2012, for the first time in history, Jean-Michel Basquiat sold for $69 million in France. He bought his work here in New York. He sold for $57 million. And people are fighting over his work. And I did inquire. Most artists are kind of loners, they don't really research what's going on. But I'm nosy, I research, I read, and I'm on social media, and I've tried to understand what's going on in this particular world. And because at first, when I first started, I had a hard time, finding my way into the crowd. It's always been a world, a culture, dominated, controlling by a certain group of people. And it's all about the numbers, where the money is, you go. I had an inquiry lately from Switzerland, and they're doing a lot of expos, and just like they've been doing here, the International Expo and the National Black Arts Festival, that's where we all started. We tried to do a Black Art on Tour and everything. But there is a certain certain limit. You cannot put out all the energy that you can put out, and still gonna be challenges. An email came in 2 weeks ago, and I was asked if I want to participate in Switzerland. I said, well, are they interested in, in ethnic art? I said, oh my gosh, Europeans are buying African arts now. It's a commodity. Every European country is trying to have their own little expo. As a matter of fact, there was a small town, Lugano, Switzerland. It's a small version of a Monte Carlo, where billionaires trying to create their own little hub. And they have a lot of collectors who are willing to collect black arts, African arts, if we don't know. That's the latest information that I want to put out. And it's doing well. And I was invited, but unfortunately, short notice, it came too late. But it's going to be next year, I'm going.
I think that American art is like the body, and African American art is the soul. It is the heart. It is the spirit. And I think that, like, if you think about music in general, it's the same thing. That the original American art is R&B, or is rhythm and blues And I think that that's the importance of it. The importance of it, that art in general has a soul, an energy, and you can feel it, but you'll notice, and I've never intentionally gravitated towards black artists, but I've always found that what moved me the most was art done by black artists. And so I think it's because it's more spiritual, it comes from a deeper rooted place. And I think that's very important.
I think black art is important, partially as a corrective, partially as a counterpoint to other narratives that are going on, and partially as, well, leaders in the sense that jazz showed the possibilities of extemporaneous music to the world, and everyone being of African descent, it resonated with them. And in the same way, I believe that art made by African Americans and the whole African diaspora is likewise important for those reasons.
I'm going to say the same thing that Charlie just was talking about, and Ruth also, is the fact that art done by black artists, it just has a soul to it. And we have as black people, our history, we have a narrative that only we can tell, and it's only a certain way it's going to come out. And I think the world deserves to see that or to hear that in terms of music, or it just has to come out, and we're the only ones that can do it. So that's why it's important.
Yeah, I agree with what all you guys are saying. This whole idea that the art definitely has a soul, it has a rhythm that's unique, but at the same time, and kind of clarifying what I mentioned earlier about black artists in a white art world, but the narrative has been historically, black artists have not been part of that narrative, the Eurocentric narrative, and it's nothing to do with the work not deserving to be part of it. A lot of it is just because it was omitted, a lot of our history is omitted in a lot of cases, but especially as artists, the work is sometimes overlooked or not given the recognition that it's deserved as black artists over the years. So basically now, it's a new time. You see a lot more artists, especially African American black artists, getting a lot more opportunities to show their work. sell the work and participate in these in these auctions and major galleries and major art festivals all across the world. So I mean, it's a new day, but things still aren't the same. I mean, it's not equal. It's still still a lot of artists not getting the same recognition that that they could get. So I think it's important as Black artists to show their work, to be the best that they can be, express themselves, and as just me personally, I think it's important to just create and understand the narrative that we are in, and kind of be that counterbalance, so to speak, and understand that you're representing not just Black artists, but you're representing a voice. You're putting your voice out there. It doesn't have to be figurative work, abstract work, or whatever you're doing, but like my brother said, your voice deserves to be heard. It deserves to be seen, and things have changed. And hopefully things will continue to change. So, yeah, for the better.
Yeah, I just want to add to what all of you said is that there has been tremendous growth and change over the last 50 years in terms of the awareness of just a genre of American history, African American art history. There's a more than 300 documented history of artists producing fine art, and there's been a tremendous change in the last 20 years in terms of the market presence. There was a time in the 80s and in the 90s, a lot of the collecting of the artists was a lot of the historic artists from the Harlem Renaissance, the Black Arts Movement, and many of the artists from the 1970s. And many of you in this room were very responsible for believing in those artists when nobody else did believe in the artists. Some people in this room bought a Romy Bearden for $200, just because they liked it and they believed in Romy Bearden. And then years later, his work would sell for 5 and 6 figures. I think that what has happened is that there's been more scholarship, even since when I first got involved in the African American art world. Since the 1980s. Now we have a lot more scholars, not only African American scholars specializing in African American and African diasporic art history, but they're documenting, they're writing, they're curating. Just think now, you have all of the sons and daughters of collectors and even people who aren't. Now the hot profession is to be a curator. And you have more curators, African American curators ever in major museums around the country now, mostly because of many of the collectors over these years that were collecting the work. And museums saying, oh my goodness, there are collections? And they started touring a lot of these collections. And then you had celebrity collectors of African American art as well. I want to try to add a balance because there's still a lot more that has to be done, but I also want to make a point that you have a lot more of the artists who are now in their 70s and 80s who are now being highly sought, like Jack Whitten, William T. Williams, even the works of Joe Overstreet, Mary Lovelace, people that now major collectors want in their collections. And more African American artists are coming up at auction now, and this is important, it's history, regularly. Before, from an appraiser's point of view, you would primarily get your values from speaking to dealers. And you'd look at the auction records, and if there was a value that was going to support what was really happening in the market, you used it. But a lot of times, in the past, a lot of the African American artists' auction records were so much lower than the market value because there was no advertising about the sale. Nobody knew about it. And there wasn't a lot going on. It wasn't about the quality of the piece, but what the sales would be higher, you would integrate it. Now you have a lot more African American artists coming to auction, but it's mostly in the contemporary arena. It's not the historic work so much. You have Mark Radford, you have Jack Whitman, you have Martin Courier, you have David Hammons. A lot of these artists that are commanding millions at auction. But this is just to show that there has been great progress, and it is important to keep that in mind, that there has been growth. Compared to the rest of the art world, it's still uneven, but it's also important to see that there's growth, because otherwise it can be, it's depressing, And we have to acknowledge progress in a way that's meaningful so that we continue to support the art, the artists, and the people who have made a commitment to represent and sell and exhibit art. I mean, I look at this exhibition and what Karen and Sharon have done. These are two people, but this is a great. It's a lot, because it's not just throwing stuff up on the wall. There's a lot that's involved, and it takes a level of commitment, but also passion, but also an understanding of the value of cultural production and historical materialism. I want to ask both Ruth and Zenobia to talk a little bit about the process of their art, because they are fiber artists and they are fine artists as well. A lot of times with different mediums, and all the other artists will talk about their process, but I wanted to start with both of you. Sometimes people may overlook really what the art is because of other kinds of textile traditions. Either they're drawn to it, or they think that it's craft, it's not fine art. Not understanding that there is a very similar and distinct art making process and the selection process. So I wanted both of you to share that, with everyone here, because I think that process is important for people to understand as also a form of fine art. You want to start?
Well, when I started, I didn't think of fiber art as a fine art medium. It just happened to be what I was already in love with. I learned to embroider when I was elementary school age, maybe 7, 8, 9, something like that, at home with my Aunt Mildred. And I did the little daisies and, on the tablecloths. But once I saw the work of a Senegalese artist, Papa Ibratal, who worked in woven tapestries, I had an aha moment that what I loved could be a form of painting. So now what I do is usually I start with a concept, but early on in the process is always a photograph. If the concept comes first, then I have to find a model who can embody it. But every once in a while, if I'm just shooting in general, or if I hire a model and something good comes up, the concept develops from that. But once there is a photograph, I make simple line drawings, which are basically like outlines, with no shading, no shadows, no highlights. I Xerox those drawings and then work on the Xeroxes so I don't damage the original. I Xerox those, I put in the shading, whatever. I also, on some of the copies, I'll do color explorations. And once I've decided exactly how it's going to go, or sometimes the original concept comes all of a piece, and sometimes it evolves at that point. But once I have the coloring down, I then go back to the line drawing and make a grid on top of it. For those who don't know what a grid is, it's a series of horizontal and vertical lines, and I use my pencil and ruler and cover my drawing with those lines, and I decide approximately how big I want the original piece to be, because I start with 8.5 by 11, usually just computer printer paper to do those drawings on. I've tried working on very fancy watercolor papers, hand-done papers, and then I'm afraid to mess them up. So I don't even bother with those now. But anyway, I take that gridded drawing and I transfer the same grid and then copy each box in the grid onto the stretched fabric. The way the other artists have canvas that's made usually on a wooden canvas stretcher, I use fabrics, linen or jute or combination of fibers, and I staple it on with a staple gun. But once it's stretched out, I can draw the grid on that, and it will be in the same proportion as the original drawing. And then I just copy each piece. Now from there, when I copy it, I only copy the line drawing, because if there is too much on the fabric, then I don't know which line to follow. So I use only the line drawing to transfer. But as I work, I have the photograph, the line drawing, the color studies, all pasted up around. I like to sit on the floor and have it supported, because I work pretty big and it's just heavy. So, you know, after several hours you get tired. So I work on the floor. But these drawings and photographs and color studies are spread out. And I refer back and forth. If I don't have the photographs, sometimes the drawing goes in other or the stitching goes in other directions than what I've planned. So I have to have all of them. The drawing and the color studies are a form of practice. It helps my mind to figure out just how the colors are going to interact. So anyway, I usually start with the face, because anything else can be relative to that. But if you do other areas, you're liable to get distorted. And from there, I stitch and stitch. I have audio books in the background so that I don't go, you know, off the beaten path. And it's like filling in a puzzle, except that I get to determine where the pieces go.
Thank you. Well, I started out, I didn't know too much about the art world, so when I got accepted into Pratt, I wanted to be a sculptor, but I didn't really trust being a sculptor because I didn't think I could make a living out of it. So I wanted to go into some kind of a commercial field where I could make a living off of doing things like design. So I studied industrial design. I got my undergraduate degree in industrial design from Pratt Institute. But with that program being so broad, it incorporated everything. It incorporated fine art, design, philosophy, systems, vaguely engineering. So whatever you wanted to go into, you could. You know, you can use your the background of your study to go into whatever you wanted to go study. Now, when I was studying industrial design, my department was very small. It was only 17 students. I was the only African American woman in the program, and the majority of the students were from countries from around the world. Governments from different countries would send their students to the United States to study mass production and designing mass production. And what that is designing cars. Back then, tape recorders and typewriters. We didn't have personal computers like we have now, but office machinery. Just everything in this room was designed by an industrial designer. So Pratt had one of the best design schools in the country. And the majority of industrial designers and industrial designer departments and studios are white males. So I knew that when I got out of school, I wasn't going to get a job in anybody's company, number one. And then I had a very unintentional African aesthetic, not African American aesthetic, but African aesthetic. And I wasn't intentionally doing that. So, and the mainstream aesthetic is minimalist, you know, muted colors, grays, tans. I mean, this room is bright compared to what the industrial designers were using. Industrial designers use as their color palette. So I took advantage of the degree, and when I got out of school, and when I was in school, I was designing wooden toys and furniture. Now, these were wooden toys and furniture for the African American home, and I was designing North American wildlife furniture. Like, I was doing rocking horses, but I was doing cougars, jaguars, different North American wildlife, which really hadn't been explored too much. And the majority of African designers or artists were always doing the aesthetic of Africa, elephants, lions, zebras. We have some dynamic North American wildlife here, even our wildflowers that haven't really been explored that much by the African American aesthetic, which is really dynamic because we're Africans in North America dealing with this North American wildlife, which is, something that's too is wide open. But anyway, so when I got out of school, I didn't have access to the power tools because, so I switched from wood furniture into crochet because that was accessible and inexpensive. A skein of yarn was about $3. And I learned how to crochet by this woman who taught me how to, this Italian Swiss woman that she's very old school, traditional Italian, and she taught me how to crochet in a way that whatever I wanted to do, I could just, almost like sculpting, I could crochet it. And instantly I applied everything that I learned in industrial design to my crochet. And crochet was easy too because it was easy to move around and pack. And I remember Faith Ringgold telling me one time, one of the reasons why she was dealing with tapestries is because whenever instead of paintings, whenever she had to ship artwork to a show, she could just fold it up and put it in a small package. But if she had a large frame, it'd be very expensive to ship, but it would be the same size as their tapestry. So I took advantage of that information and applied it to what I do. So everything is foldable, it's not on the frame. But I did crochet for a long time because, and that wasn't supposed to be my medium of choice, but I did it for years because I was trying to figure out what to do after graduation. So that whole period of crocheting was just a meditation, but I had to have something to show for that period of just thinking about what I was, going to go into. And I decided after I started the project Paradise Under Reconstruction in the Aesthetic of Funk in 1999, and that was just a series of crochet. That was the meditation. All the pieces that you see, it was not intentional, my practice. It was a meditation on what I wanted to do. So, and I decided that the African American homemaker was the prototype to American material culture. That's the essence of where our material culture comes from. So I started my design practice from the African American homemaker after emancipation. So, and I just recently started that research going into, just really doing intense studying photographs, and even when I started Paradise in 1999, we didn't have the scholarship back then that we have now. So I can even study a lot deeper the whole African American material culture than what I could back then. And Dillard University, Ray Charles is very deep. Ray Charles bequeathed $1 million to Dillard University to develop a material culture practice. A lot of people don't even, the school they really didn't understand what material culture was, but Ray Charles knew, and he knew to start it in New Orleans because New Orleans has a population of material culture of free people of color that were defining their own aesthetic. This is they were very wealthy people. These people were funding the Civil War. They were funding abolition schools. They were funding the Underground Railroad. They were funding a lot of the press of the of Frederick Douglass and anybody that needed anything printed. So this group of people, they had engineered, designed homes, anything in material culture. This is before emancipation, So Ray Charles, and I think the story when he was down in New Orleans for a period of time, and he was doing really bad financially, and they took him in, and these people in New Orleans, and he discovered the material culture down there, and he was trying to figure out, well, how come the rest of the country, it was never in my history, I never studied the material culture of free people of color. Even when we study design, it's not in American history. But anyway, Ray Charles was saying, well, why is this so new to me? I'm an adult man. And so he said that whenever he was able, he was going to dedicate some money to one of the universities to develop a department for the study of, for the development of the material culture of African American people. So really, basically, that's what my practice is about, the development of the African American material culture, which really never was developed. Even after Reconstruction period, we were assimilated into jobs. We never got into engineering thing. Isaac Newton, everything in all of our disciplines are based on Isaac Newton's equations, everything. Now, that's not to say there's not another way of equating out there, because us as African people, we equate with frequency and vibration. That's what nanotechnology is. Nanotechnology is sculpting an atom, breaking it up with frequency and vibration. We, as very rhythmic people and people that have an intense knowledge of frequency and vibration, there needs to be another system of equating to develop our sciences. So that basically is what my practice is about. And the crochet is my meditation. Simple as.
And sometimes I might be a little wrong about this, but I would just like to see us control our narrative as much as possible, and along with the progress that's happening out there. But back to the question, I like to see some youth juvenile court systems getting work. You know, I like to see HBCUs getting work, like it was. And not forget that, you know, and not let our work to a certain degree as it get more popular, just like music, hip hop music and everything else, as it gets popular. Okay, now it's hot. Now that's, you know, sometimes you kind of lose control of the financial, situation. So I would like for us to kind of control our narrative and understand that, that we're valuable, and sometimes we forget that, I think, and that has a lot to do with this history that, the country is being built on. We sometimes undervalue who we are. We're very beautiful, rich, culturally, vibrant, and we full of energy and everything else, and sometimes we kind of don't value ourselves as much as we should, maybe. But anyway, yeah, maybe I got a little bit long-winded about that. But yeah, schools, HBCUs, juvenile courts, inspire the youth to better themselves. Because I think sometimes they don't see the art, they don't see visual art, and get the chance to see that inspiration would be a good thing. So.
I would like to say, I would like to do like Andy Warhol and Joan Mitchell and Jacob Lawrence Foundation are doing, because like they have, Joan Mitchell didn't have any children, but she created this foundation that houses her body of work, but she created an artist residency. She has grant programs for different artists around the world. She, she supports young artists and artists that, really can't have that time or that studio to work. And their money and their artwork, Andy Warhol gives out millions of dollars a year through his foundation. And, it's from the, his art. He has a very good management that was able to do that, but I would like for my work to be out. It would definitely be in my family, but it would be accessible to be out on loan, but it would definitely be in a foundation where I can have residencies and grant programs and libraries or whatever else, would help the next generation of young artists or emerging artists.
Like I said, quickly, I'd like to say same thing my brother was saying, but to extend on that, I have a kind of a business background, so I always think sometimes on the business level, which most artists do for the most part too, but I think as a people we come together, and I like to see black museums. I know there's a few out there, but on the same level, to compete on the same level as these so-called white institutions. You have other ethnic groups who come together and they have their communities and they build each other up. I think as a people, we started doing that in the past, but some kind of way we kind of got away from it. We're kind of bringing that back together and really building institutions up that we control, and where foundations do start to exist and things like of that nature. So just kind of piggybacking off my brother, but basically let us control our destiny and value our work.
So, with that, I want to thank all of you for coming and sharing this really interesting and hopefully informative evening. And please make sure that you take another look at the exhibition that's on display of all of these artists' work. And I want to wish you a great evening. And I will end with a very quick story about 3 friends. And you ask your friends to go with you on a journey. And the first friend says, I can't, I'm home now. And the second friend says, well, I can go, but I can only go to the city limits. And the third friend says, I can go with you wherever you go. And the first friend is a metaphor for all of your material possessions. They cannot go with you wherever you go. And the second friend says that they can go with you up to the city limits. Is your family and your closest friends. They can help you so far, but you really have to go the rest of whatever the journey is yourself. And the third friend that says that they can travel with you wherever you go, or all of your good deeds and intentions. They travel with you wherever you go. So, may all of you have good health, long lives, and continue to fill your lives with meaningful experiences. And that also includes supporting African American visual culture and cultural production so that you can share your experiences and your personal histories and also inspire people around you to reflect upon the best within themselves.
Thank you.
Before you all leave, if you just will indulge me for just a minute, Mackey twins are, those of you who are diehard and those of you who are just getting to know them, they always bring you not just fabulous art, but they bring you the personal lives of the artists whose artwork you come to see. So we want, if you just give a special round of applause to those artists. They took time out of their lives to come here and see you, and spend their time with you, and to share their narratives with you about the work that they create for you. Finally, but certainly not the least, Dr. Halima Taha. It is an honor to have her. She's a scholar in the arts, and this wonderful program, she brought such wonderful flavor to it, and I'd like you all to just please give her a special round of applause. She is a treasure. She is our treasure. And if you have not seen her book, then you should look it up, because she is capturing the work of artists of color, artists who represent us. She is making it relevant, bringing scholarship. So she's a real treasure, and we are grateful to have had her with us today. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.